Hello, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. We are going to be talking today about balancing structure and creativity, which is sort of a how much do you need to, how much do you plan in advance, how much do you haven't, how much do you plot, how much do you pants, but more specific than that, more like each individual person's. I guess we'll get into it. Why try to be articulate now?
It does seem like a waste of time.
We've gone how many years not actually being really articulate. So anything cool. I think it's a different definition of cool right now. So I was just going to say, I don't know that I have anything, but maybe I do if you give me a minute.
Dave, do you have anything cool?
No.
I want to know how you are handling it with your family home all the time now.
I've lost my fucking mind.
The irony here is that he's never been more ready for a worst show ever or less able to record one.
He can't perform one anymore.
Yes, and I need one. I need therapy.
Is this, well, yes, clearly. Is this the longest that you've ever been, I would say home with your family, but we really know the right word is trapped.
Yes. This is the longest, and it's really fresh. Like I like to listen to music and sing when I write, but my wife's work has her doing some virtual meetings and stuff without saying what her job is. So
she's a cam girl, right?
Yeah, she's a cam girl. So and she comes in, she's like, I'm starting a meeting, stop singing. I'm like,
so are you ready to go all Jack Torrance, or how are you feeling?
I can see it. I can totally see it.
Yeah. To be fair, I started off there, so I don't know where you go from there.
So is all work and no play making Dave a dull boy?
A dull boy, yes. Dave is a dull boy.
The best part is that eventually one of these times when we figure out who Dave is and where he lives, that sort of thing, we're going to discover it's this gigantic shambling hotel with creepy ghost twin girls in every corner.
Okay, that would be awesome, because then at least I could get away. I would just go to the top floor.
I do love that Dave's whole MO now is a guy whispering from from his prison cell.
Shh, they'll hear us.
Anybody out there? Anybody hear me?
SOS.
Dave's life has turned into a message in a floating bottle. Just misery.
It's on the Titanic.
Is anybody else picturing Dave's wife coming in and telling him to turn down the music and stop singing, and then Dave goes, when I'm in here, it means that I'm working. When you hear tap, tap, so why don't you start by getting the fuck out of here?
When you hear me running them jewels, work is being done.
And then I imagine a scene where she comes in and there's an over-the-shoulder shot of Dave's manuscript and it says all work and no play makes Dave a dull boy. I can totally see it.
I've written 100,000 words today, but they're all those.
Well, at least they're not missing deadlines.
No, not at all. I mean, it's completely great for my productivity.
Anything cool though?
I'll throw something cool. It's a show that I'm watching on my own. Johnny knows how that goes, right? And I think that's how Dave watches 100% of his things.
Yeah. I mean, I'm social distancing now, big time.
In triplicate. Hey, Dave,
20 feet away at all times.
Have you seen The Deuce yet?
No.
He has, but it's a different definition of the Deuce.
The one I left in the toilet earlier, yeah.
Well, okay, you have such a David Simon fetish. Is there a reason? Are you not that interested in the topic, or just not enough time, not high enough on your list?
It's on HBO, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I only had HBO because someone gave me a gift card for it. So I had it just for a small window of time, and in that time I just watch whatever the hell.
You just snorted Watchmen and Leftovers, and then we're done.
I didn't even get to finish Leftovers. So I watched Watchmen, and I watched what do you call it?
Make Millions.
No, The
Angels
Outsider.
in America.
The Outsider. Angels in America. I saw that a long time ago.
I was just pulling that one out. Well, The Deuce is great. So for those of you who don't know what it is,
Maggie Gyllenhaal's in it, right?
yeah, she is.
She's awesome.
Yeah, she's great. But that's, I mean, the draw for me is David Simon. It's the guy who did The Wire. So
I know who David Simon is.
I'm not telling you. In case somebody listening doesn't know who David Simon is, he's the guy who did The Wire. And this has the same kind of like reality to it, but he's exploring. So The Wire explores essentially the drug trade in Baltimore, and it's really about the people, and it kind of,
also the educational system, the police system,
yeah,
the
that's
government,
where I was
and
going.
how it's corrupt.
It pulls the camera back every season. So the first season, you're in a tight little neighborhood, and
neighborhoods are tight.
And then you're in season 2 deals with the education system, and you have students who are in school who are then getting pulled into the streets. And then the third season is the docks, and then you get politics, and then the last season is the Baltimore Sun. So
the docks one was the weakest one to me. I felt. I don't know. I mean, I don't know why.
I think it all played. I think that
it did in the end, but as it on its own, that was the one I enjoyed the least. The Baltimore Sun, obviously, the one I enjoyed the most.
Okay. I'm glad that you said that, because that's actually my point about The Deuce, is that the first season, as much as I was excited about this, so the premise is it's basically David Simon, kind of his take, but on the foundation of the porn industry, which was born in 1970s New York. And I mean, of course, there was porn before that, but this is when
what? That's twice, Johnny. Now I said the same.
You guys are slowly.
We are increasingly the same person. We've actually had discussions where Sean said something like, "You could be like Dave." That actually has come up.
All work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy too.
Oh yeah, totally.
So it's of course there was pornography before that, but this is when laws changed, and it kind of like decency laws in New York changed. There was a lot of graft, and so it basically it's about the evolution of the industry. And I don't remember the first season. I want to say it took place in 1972, and then the second season that I'm watching right now is 77, and then I think it's early 80s. So it's pivotal points. And the first season is the equivalent of the third season of The Wire, but they start out with like the more boring stuff. And I'm just like, oh, well, I don't even know if, basically I saw the first season maybe 2 years ago, and I thought it's not as much as I was hoping for. It's not as good as I expected. And then I just ended up watching season 2 starting recently. And, wow, it's really good. But one of the things that makes it so good is all the heavy lifting that was done in season 1 to kind of build this world and say, these are who these people are. And then when you go a few years in the future and you show how this law has changed everyone's life, and how like basically how I'm sure it's setting up the third season, it's really fascinating. So if you like more layered, it is harder to watch in that it feels really researched. We were actually talking about this on a story call yesterday, that it's one of those shows that has me going to Google to see what's real and what's not. Because, it's like, so the example I used yesterday is that there's a movie in The Deuce that they make called Little Red, or Red Hot, I think is what it is actually. And it's a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, but that's supposed to be done like as art porn, because Maggie Gyllenhaal, who is a prostitute in season 1, becomes a director and is making, movies, adult films in season 2. And so she wants to make art. And so she's making this Big Bad Wolf movie. And it feels real. It's not, but it's based on things that were real. But anyway, the people, the situations, all of it has me wondering what the line between fact and fiction is. And that's a lot of fun. But Dave, you would dig it. It's got the same energy as The Wire.
Yeah. Well, next time I get HBO, I'll check it out.
Dave, anything for you?
No, just yeah.
Well, my something cool is largely imagining Dave's family in quarantine. So, I mean, that is taking up a lot of our. Well, have we talked? I don't want to be one more voice on this, because I'm just sick of it, but have we even mentioned the whole coronavirus thing on this show? Has it even
only
come
in
up?
only in passing. And honestly, I was actually thinking about this, that I would want to do a show, except I know that it's not your favorite topic. But
Well, I'm just fucking sick of it. Like you can turn. Hey, I want to watch a show about quilting. Oh, well, it's about the coronavirus today.
yeah, but it is a really big topic, and
Even Pornhub's just all coronavirus all the time.
I wouldn't be shocked if they have some sort of coronavirus special. I don't know if you were kidding, but I wouldn't even be surprised.
It's like the trending search.
No, I actually I did read about this. Pornhub gave
read
Italy,
about.
I don't live in Italy, but when it was first like breaking out, and Italy was the one that locked their doors, they gave everyone in Italy a coupon code for a free month.
Seriously,
Pornhub.
that's funny.
Yeah, no, I am serious. Yeah,
Wow.
I read that before. I think it was when Italy was exploding, but the panic had not hit the U.S. yet. It was still brewing.
U.S. was still, me included, saying, no big deal.
I heard that, I didn't see this. I heard, of course, that Pornhub had an ad that showed, good thing you stocked up on, and it showed like rolls of toilet paper. They're very good with their marketing.
Oh, well, they are. There's a, I don't know if I did this for something cool or not, but there's an excellent podcast called The Butterfly Effect, which traces the effects of, this is a whole different topic, but there's a company called MindGeek that basically, they own Pornhub and all the other tube sites, most of the other tube sites, and they own most of the major porn studios. They basically made porn free so that they could go in and buy up all the, secondary tier companies, and they transformed the industry, which, that's the story right now. And the Deuce is like the beginning of this long epic saga. It is really interesting, but they're all data people. These aren't pornographers. They're engineers and, like data geeks who kind of changed the entire environment. It's really interesting.
Right on. All right. Well, so let's move into the topic. So balancing structure and creativity. I was talking on a previous show. I'm pretty sure that this is because of course I didn't write down my own inspiration, but I'm pretty sure that this was the discussion. It was probably when I was in the midst of the project that kind of consumed my writing life for, I mean, probably a year on and off, right? Like there were little breaks.
Probably it was a year.
And it was like, wow, that was a lot. And one of the major things, I mean, maybe this is a story that we could tell to kind of be an example and kick this off, but that involved another party, and it involved, say, an excess of beats. And what I'm finding more and more is that I need very, very skeletal instructions, because the story is found in the instructions, and I feel beholden to any extra instructions given to me in the form of beats, in the form of former drafts, that sort of thing. And I think that's just sort of what we wanted to talk about today, was how to find that sweet spot where you're working with like your most optimized, say. Is that a good description?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think the more writers are always looking for a process. It's just natural. Like, oh, where's an outlining template that I can get? And we know that, like our 40 sentence scene thing that Bonnie developed was downloaded all over the place like crazy. Anytime we have a formula, a system, a fiction formula, right? That's why the book is named that way, because we know that's attractive. Writers really are looking for, some sort of a template to their process. But that's the thing. There can be a template to your process, but it's not transferable. Like I could have my process just down like perfectly. It doesn't mean I could give it to Dave and say, hey, this will make you go faster. Right? Or if he finally nailed his process and said, okay, I've got it. Like I'm never going to be late again. Why don't you try this? And he gave it to a different writer. It wouldn't work for that writer. Right? So it's about hacking your own, I don't know.
Unless that process involves cocaine.
Yes.
That'll work for everybody.
I don't think it would work for me. I
don't think I'd enjoy it either.
No, it seems like a miserable thing.
I'm anxious enough.
I'm energetic enough. But I think that's exactly it. And as difficult as this project has been for Johnny, I think it's kind of been instructive. I think there's a lot of things that we'll do a lot more of.
Well, I'll
and a lot
never
of things
forget
we'll
it.
Never do again.
Yeah, I mean, failure or frustration or mind-numbing, like want to kill everybody, sort of. Those are well, it was maybe just Dave in quarantine, but those are the sorts of things that the lessons you never forget. Like that is not a mistake I'm going to make again, specifically because of this. So yes, it was instructive. I feel like I could have learned the same thing with a lot less irritation. Like I could have been like, okay, 1 month, I got it, I'm good.
Well, there was this project had two things going wrong for it. The first was just kind of like original sin, the mistake that we made by involving another party in the project. And that was necessary because that's where it was born. So
can we give any, I know we don't want to give like title or plot or anything like that, but can we give some of the because this is going to be really rough.
That's exactly where I was going. Yeah. Do you want to tell that story?
No, go ahead. I mean, you were already telling it. I didn't know if you were going to continue with bakeries or not.
No, that's too hard. So this was born a year and a half ago. Johnny and I went to LA. It was during our first trip to LA to kind of start shopping some of our projects. And the first person that we talked to, we were maybe, 20 minutes into the meeting. And the person we were pitching to said, well, I actually
just to make this easier, let's just call him John.
Okay.
Just make it easier.
Hey, can you give me a fake name for the book too? Because that'll be good. That'll be coming up
John's
later.
book.
All right. So
Book of John.
So we're talking to John, and we like him immediately. The vibe is there immediately. In fact, the building that we're going to is under construction. They're putting a bunch of like temporary offices in there, and so we're coming up, and the building or the elevator opens, and John is right there. Now, we've never met John, so we don't know what he looks like, but the guy that we're with, obviously he knew. He set up the meeting. And so they see each other, and we're just like immediately like, hello. Like we didn't meet in the office. It was kind of an off chance meeting ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And so he steps into the elevator with us, and I start telling a story about this shit building I used to live in with an old 1920s gate elevator that always got stuck. By the time we get off the elevator, we're already kind of bonded. It happened very fast. We sit down, we have 20 minutes or so where we're talking about Invasion, which is a much, much bigger project than what this guy is used to doing. And so really it turns at that point, and our pitching him turns into him pitching us. So because this meeting had been set up ahead of time, he was familiar with our work. He did his homework before we got there, and he basically said, "Look, I want to work with you guys." And he's a producer, so he's never directed a movie before because he's Canadian. And for green card reasons, he had to, he couldn't be a producer, or he couldn't be a director. He had to be a producer.
I think it's basically he couldn't be an entrepreneur. He needed to be a salaried employee. I think is basically how that breaks down.
So he basically has never lost money on. He has a background in finance before he was in film. He is very, very entrepreneurial. He's totally our people. His two businesses now are movie production and real estate. And what's really interesting is that he's kind of hacked it so that he uses the same skill set and the same team with both projects, which I think is really cool. And so he was, because he has been a successful producer, he already has sort of guaranteed money lined up for his directorial debut. And he can write. It's not his favorite thing to do. And he really liked the idea of collaborating with someone. And we seemed, right about perfect for what he was looking for, especially because we were able to say, oh yeah, we write really fast. We'll get an idea together. The whole idea was kind of to reverse engineer something alongside him and say, hey, why don't we take locations that you think are interesting and themes that you think are interesting and, actors you would want to work with, or at least styles of actors you would want to work with, and we can write a story kind of to spec. And that seemed like a really great idea, and it was. The problem was Johnny and I had never actually tested these assumptions. We never brought somebody else into our process. So,
well, I want to just to jump in really quick to clarify. I think that the idea of writing a project to spec and the idea of writing a project in the way that Sean's about to describe are different things. And I think that we remain confident of the first, and I don't think that ever would have been shaken, but it was the second. We assumed that the second one, working with somebody in this way, was the way to get the other thing. And it turned out, spoiler alert, that was not true.
right. In fact, it was totally the opposite. So there were a couple of things that happened that really sent us off our rails. First of all, we were just thrilled. We were really excited because we got an opportunity to come up with a story that almost for sure would have a $10 million budget minimum, and it could be
for a movie, right? Yeah,
for a movie, all the way up to $30 million, depending on what we wrote. And as we developed the concepts, the budget started to get bigger, and so it was like, okay, well, we're going to do this, and we flew out to LA, and we were there for several days, and we worked with John to kind of come up with some concepts, and then began the outlining process. And the outlining process typically with Johnny and I is we'll talk about a concept, we'll come up with it really loosely, we'll have story meetings, and then I'll come up with an outline that's it's not like this happens exactly and then this happens exactly. It's more like, as Johnny described all the way back in Write, Publish, Repeat, it's like a drunk friend telling you a story that he was barely paying attention to when he saw it the first time. Like he's relaying a movie. And it's like that. It's like, this thing should happen. And, oh, wouldn't it be cool if? And it's more like, an excited ADD kid, telling you a story, because it's not even like it's filled with beats that have to happen so much as things I think Johnny will think are funny, or reference points that'll, that we have in common that I know he'll riff off of. And what happened now is that after spending several days with a big whiteboard and a bunch of Post-its and ordering food in,
right? That was the second trip. I guess I didn't need to clarify that. I guess that was sort of assumed. Anyway, continue with the story.
We flew back out. So we met in November, and we set a date for February to fly back out and, develop these ideas. And it's complicated. The premise itself is complicated. And so we had different timelines, questions about reality. And so the bulk list of things that had to be included in the outline was definitely the biggest list I've ever had to work with, before starting an outline, which is usually just an idea, and then I'll see where it goes. So now all of a sudden I have a punch list of things that have to be in this outline. That was hard enough, but we got the outline, and then we're making our process even more difficult, even more complicated, because now we've got John on three-way calls, and he's going through the outline and asking lots of questions. New suggestions are popping up. Johnny's doing his usual articulation thing and trying to get clarity on the outline, but that's just breeding more questions. And, and so it's not the amount of words that were in this outline, it's the density. So for example, I'll typically start with a 20,000 word outline for a 100,000 word book. That's not, unreasonable if it's an outline that Bonnie and I are working on together, for example. But Johnny's outlines are much sparer than that. And if they are 20,000 words, it's not 20,000 words of story. There's 20,000 words of a lot of character,
or background. This is stuff you just need to know about the world, but that doesn't need to be included specifically in the story, that sort of thing.
Right. And we had 20,000 words of just this has to happen, and this has to happen, and this has to happen. And so, and also, we were getting story jackets on it from Bonnie, and that would bring more things out to that we had to address. And that's normally stuff that we address in the story itself, because it comes up. Johnny's discovery happens in the outline, which is the whole point of this episode. So that's kind of sets the stage that by the time Johnny sat down to write draft one of this book last March, so over a year ago, he's sitting down with something that he's really excited to write. He might have been more excited to start this project than any project we've ever worked on, even though he was a little bit maybe overwhelmed by, the stakes of it.
Well, the intimidation probably took away from some of it. Yeah.
But it was
sorry, I didn't know you were going to stop. But yeah.
But yeah, he was excited. This is like a great move for us. We know that when this book is done, it's going to be on its way down to getting a treatment, becoming a movie. That's all really, really exciting. But then it was just one problem after another. So that's kind of setting the stage. Johnny, it's all yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot more to this story, and maybe this is because I think that I had 2 suggestions for shows, and this might have been the other one. Once we can really talk openly about it, which we can't fully yet for obvious reasons, I think. But basically, I wrote. It was just an incredible quagmire of stuff by the time that I really kind of got rolling on it. So I wrote. I remember writing the first paragraph and taking a picture of my screen and sending it to Sean and John. And I was like, look at it. It's so exciting. Isn't this a really cool start? It's kind of got this weird trippy vibe. And I don't remember what happened. That paragraph has
never changed, right?
It changed very little. Yeah, it actually, which is typical. I would expect that. But I don't remember when I slowed down, but I know that I did. I think I wrote a few scenes probably enthusiastically. And what I do, my process is that I will go and look at the beats. Usually I read them all the way through at the beginning, get the general feel. And honestly, I'm realizing now I stopped reading the beats on this one all the way through, and that should have been a sign, because the beats were this wasn't part of your story. The beats were so incredibly, you said that they got fatter and fatter, but they were super, it was like a book. And it was just insanely complicated. And so trying to keep all of that in my head was really, really tough. And I think that once I started reading through these, you can't see this if you're not on video, but okay, say an inch of beats vertically on a page is probably what we started with originally in when we first started working together. It's grown a little bit, and we've sort of massaged it to the way that works for us, but these were enormous. So a chapter now was there were chapters that were more than a page, because we just kept saying, well, and remember this, and it's like this thing. And
I should have realized then too, because it's so beyond what our process and what we've become comfortable with. It really should have set off some warning signs before things went off the rails, I think.
Yeah, long story short on this, basically it was one problem after another, and it was just very, very hard to write. And I feel like I went through the first version a few times or something like that. I feel like there were a few starts and stops, but I do know that around the 90,000 word mark, Sean and I made the painful but correct decision to just start over. And it felt like that was going to be, and I don't do that, by the way. I know that some writers do. I know that Dave does that sometimes. I never do. I work with what's there. And if I throw something away, it's because I'm done with it. It's because I'm just not going to do it. And so that felt monumental. But the thinking was, now that I know the story, that I could go back and just write it fluidly, because we talked through a bunch of stuff. Well, I didn't actually know the story. And
we just knew what the story wasn't at that point.
Well, I think what I was discounting is how incredibly much of my process of a story is born through I wasn't going to say it's through the process of writing. It's when my fingers are on the keyboard and I'm in that kind of flow state that you get into when you're writing. And because of that, by definition, it can't be on the page. And this had the beats page, and the beats were so thorough that this is what I started to say before, is I feel if I'm working by myself, I understand how I think. But if I'm working with a partner, and in this case I was working with 2, I feel a duty to be a good partner. So if my partner has taken the time to put stuff in the beats, that I feel that I at least need to wave my hand at it. And I know that I can skip all that stuff. I know that. And John, to his credit, said, you guys do your thing. I don't need to be involved. If you want to include me, you can, but the book is the book, and we'll worry about the script later. And so I knew all those things, but it didn't feel that way. And so what I ended up doing was trying to incorporate every little thing to some degree, or at least keep it in mind. Well, if that comes up, then I need to do it. And that was, it was just kind of not compatible with the creation process. And so, so by the 90,000 word mark, it was like, okay, now I understand it. Now I'm not going to pay attention to the beats. I'm going to set them aside. We knew that was the problem by then. And I'll just write it over with fresh momentum. It was kind of like, getting a car out of the mud. Okay, get back and bring it back a little bit first, and then we'll push it forward through. And that did not solve the problem. And I think that throwing away that draft was probably almost reset one of like 5. Right? Like there were several times where we had to do some sort of a reset, some sort of a reframe. I know that by the end, including during the revision, because by the way, the revision was a motherfucker, and that is never true for me. Usually I soar through edits when I have to do them because I write smooth first drafts.
And in this case, I need a psychological hit too. There was a call
just to finish. Oh, you're going to tell the story. This is what I was going to say. So
go ahead.
Well, I remember being like, because normally when Sean and I are working together, I don't do that first pass revision, but I had to because because the story had changed so much. By the end, the story was and I'm talking of the rewritten draft. The story was a fundamentally different story. It wasn't the story was different. It's that the truths were different. It's that, okay, that person we know now is a bad guy who is lying in 6 different directions. They don't know, we know, they know, we know, sort of thing. And so I felt that it made much more sense. It was fresher to me. I knew it, and I knew it was going to feel like first draft writing because so much of it was going to have to be new. And so Sean and I got on a call, and it was, I don't know, it was a few days into it, or maybe even, no, it was probably a few weeks into it.
Yeah,
it was going damn slow.
It was deep into it. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I was basically like, asking for permission, even though I knew that it was not correct to get permission. So by the time we were on the phone, all the reversals were already in my head about how I was going to beg to not do this draft or not do this project or find something. But I also knew that there was no solution. So I think a quiet, childlike part of me was hoping that Sean would say, it's okay, I'll make it better. But I knew that he couldn't. Like, I knew I had to do this. And
I seriously would have, but there was no way for me to step into Johnny's head. Like, there was just, it's basically like
being Johnny Truant.
Yes. You walk into a room and someone's like reorganizing everything. So all the drawers are empty and everything's everywhere. And it's like, can you just clean this up? Your
mom's house?
Right. It would be like going to my mom's house and knowing where everything goes. It's just impossible. So, and I felt for Johnny because he sounded so defeated, and
that's the right word for it.
Yeah, there was one part where he was just, it wasn't that he was even trying to give it up. He's just like, is there any way that I could just put?
I need a break from it.
Yeah, and I come back to it in like a few months with fresh eyes, and I'm just like, dude, we both know if you put this down, you're not picking it back up. It's just too, if it's hard now, it's going to be.
Yeah, you tell that story to Connor quick, dude.
So
another story I put down.
Right. So it's just like when things get hard and we put them down, we don't pick them up, right? Like Dave's dead baby on Christmas story, that one's dead. Like he's never going to take my notes on that and rewrite it.
I'll show you.
but to clarify something on that, it's not because we're lazy and we don't get around to it. It's because, let me see if I can articulate this. It's because there's a momentum of creation, and I can't stop and come back to it because the idea isn't sort of fresh and urgent at that point. I would need to.
It's hard to
get that running start again. Like, yeah, I don't care.
And it shows when you don't care.
Yes, a lot of our art is.
Although I did hate this by the end.
So
I hate it in a very particular way.
You can use that in your sales pitch for the book. I hate this fucking book so much.
Okay, so we put off.
But you will love it.
We put off talking about this project for a long time. I mean, for a lot of reasons. First is because it's in process. The second is just because there is another party involved, and it does have a life beyond it being a book. And so part of that we just need to keep closer now. It's kind of
arguably the life beyond it being a book is more accurately the life that it has, right? Like it's barely a book. It's a book so that it can be this movie.
Right. Although it's turned into kind of a monster. So it's over a couple 100,000 words. And now that Johnny has passed it off and it's on my plate, I'm glad that we can talk about it. And I'll say it's great. Like, it's really good. And I actually meant to Slack you this all day, Johnny. But I just didn't. And now we're talking live. But the Slack was just going to be, dude, you're a hell of a storyteller. And what I love about what I love about this story is that I'm almost paying too much attention, because the comments that Johnny left are basically a novella. Like, there's a novella's worth of comments that are like, so I took a day just to read the comments.
And I didn't leave him a lot either. That's the funny thing. So the novella's worth of comments is I handled 95% of the big shit that needed to be done. So that's what's so funny about it.
Right. So these aren't comments that are like, handle this, handle this, handle this. They're comments like that explain his thinking at some point in the draft. And it's almost like, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's almost too much. It's getting in my head because I don't know. He'll tell me that something's been handled, but then I'm thinking about that thing and I'm looking out for this thing, or there'll be a comment that says like, I'm not sure if this got handled. And so I'm on the lookout for it, but then it's very well handled. Actually, I just need to be patient. And a couple of chapters later, that question is answered, or the thing that he was, worried about maybe not getting touched is very much touched by the time, I would respond.
You're going to get to the point where you tell me that why I'm a great storyteller, right? That's still kind of.
Well, it's just there. It's like, there's mystery. Like, the thing that Dave will unplug from immediately in a story is if there's not mystery. Like, if there's no reason for him to keep reading, because
or if it opens with a musical number.
This does not open with a musical number. It opens with a really cool plot device, actually. Well, it doesn't matter, but there is a lot of mystery, and there is a lot of like, what the fuck. But I could have started this and ignored all of those comments, and it wouldn't have made a difference in the edit.
Oh, that's funny.
And that's like, I totally...
Yeah, usually, but by the way, well, I was going to give some example, but you've actually several times given this metaphor of like, what somebody from like Saved by the Bell cheating by writing things on his hand, or was it, I don't know, something. Right. And then he didn't need it because he wrote it on his hand. Yeah. So, it's similar to that. I mean, I used to take notes all the time in high school and college, and I never ever looked at those notes because I had learned them because I took notes. And that's exactly what this is.
That's the perfect analogy, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I will leave a note, and I know when I'm leaving those that there's a 99% chance that it's totally irrelevant, but I don't want to forget it in the off chance that I do miss it. And I also want to make sure that that the act of making the note does make me remember.
Right. And so that's what I mean. There's the cognitive load of reading those comments and being aware of what needs to happen, going forward in the draft. But your precision as a storyteller is very evident on the page. And it's
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really impressive because I know how much mind fuckery I'm looking at. Like, I know all of
but I disguise it well.
Yeah, right. Like, I can't, like, okay, I mean, I'm not comparing quality of work here, but I am comparing process. When if Dave had gone through this much trauma in the drafting process, it would be way more evident on the page. Dave
goes through his trauma when he experiences the stories that he tells, and then he saves it for later.
There is truth to that. But
I suffer for my art, and you'll know it.
Yes, very much. But there are things to clarify, and there's work to do on it, but that's my job. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do when I get a draft back. The actual mechanics of the story, which are what I was most worried about, because this was such an arduous project, I didn't need to worry. Like, I just didn't. The story is there. The story is well told. And considering how much we had to go through to get there, it's especially impressive. And I know that, like, historically, spending a year on a book, especially one that's over a couple 100,000 words, which this is like, that's not slow. That's the way writing and publishing used to work. But that model has changed, and it's not the way
it's
we
fast
work.
if your name is George Martin.
It's very fast if your name is George R. Martin. But for Johnny and I, it's not that like a longer process means it's a better book. That's just not the way we work. You know, it doesn't.
It's actually usually the inverse. Usually the
Right.
best books are fast.
Yes, absolutely. So this was completely opposite our usual process, and yet I think that it ended up teaching us a lot about our process, which I think we should get into that. Like, what are the biggest takeaways? Because I remember the light bulb moment. I think, yes, I remember. It was when we did like a not a genre therapy. Was it a genre therapy? Yeah, it was. We did an in-person thing, and you had a light bulb moment where somebody else was talking about their process. Do you remember that?
Not at all.
Okay, so somebody else was saying that they needed their beats like 2/3 of the way through, and then they didn't want beats after that. And it was like skeletal beats. I wish I remember who said
No,
this.
it was like beats to the midpoint. I remember thinking of that, and I remember thinking that I no longer felt that was accurate for me, but I don't remember why. It was some caveat, but I think the point is, because since the whole thing is about, but this one is supposed to be about balancing creativity and structure, is that don't necessarily follow anybody else's advice. It really is something you have to find on your own. And I think it was really surprising to me to find that it's almost a linear relationship, that fewer beats equals a better time, more fun, and a better process. And it means that I am quite a bit more of a pantser than I think that I thought I was. And I think that just recently we talked in the fiction formula, like I was under the description of what did you call it? It's like a in between. But I think I'm much more toward pants than I thought I was like 2 years ago. I think that I need that spontaneity, because anything, even good suggestions, are going to slow me down.
You wear your pants half off.
Exactly.
Dave, what's changed about your process in the last year or two, if anything?
I'd say we plan out more in the beats, and I think Bonnie's been very helpful in helping me figure out some character things I miss, or things I didn't get in the outline that it might have taken me longer to find if I was going through the story, and she sees things I don't even see, which is really good. Also, I hate when I have a blind spot, so I like beat myself a little, but that's another story. I would just say plotting, like I adapted to the 40 chapter structure more or less, depending on the story. And plotting it out feels more structured than it did in the past. For a lot of our stuff, I just kind of, the story is going to go where it's going to go. And
well, you felt more like the instincts of somebody who loved story rather than somebody who is a professional storyteller who has a job to do, right? Like it's a little bit different, the approach, I think.
Yeah, I would say I'm approaching it more workmanlike, I guess, now.
Do you get enjoyment from telling yourself that version of the story?
What do you mean?
So, for example, the last couple of outlines that I've worked on with Bonnie, we call them 1.0 outlines. Mm-hmm. So she'll tell a thinner version of that story rather than expanding the entire outline out and then handing me a finished outline, which, Bonnie's outlines are very involved if they're all the way to the end. So a 1.0 outline is more like, it's more like an outline I would actually give to Johnny, where it's just a little thinner. It's more like, here's the basics of what have to happen in this chapter. If you don't get these elements in the chapter, you suck, right? Like it's the basics. But after she hands that to me, then I'm telling myself the story. So I expand, if I have, 200 words, I'll expand that to maybe 600 to tell myself, okay, well, it's just a more fleshed out version. And right now I'm finding that I get enjoyment out of telling myself that second version of the story. And I'm actually, there's 2 outlines that we've done like this recently, and they're both just kind of waiting for me to to start on. And I'm going to spend a full day on each outline before I start writing, going over it again and telling myself that story one more time and adding more details, because I know that that's going to help me to really fly through it. And the reason we started that was because, it was taking Bonnie a long time to flesh out something completely. And I thought maybe that's not efficient. Maybe just tell me especially on a story you're not as invested in, just tell me the lighter version. And Bonnie said, Bonnie's always trying to be protective of my time. And she said, well, but that's not as efficient for you if you have to do that. And my argument was, maybe it is, because if I tell myself that story and I know the story better, it's like what Johnny was just saying, about, it was Mike Seaver in Growing Pains, he writes all the answers on his hands and then he doesn't need to cheat because he knows the answers. So by telling myself the story, will I save hours in the draft? I'm pretty sure I will. So,
I would like to, it does get frustrating when an outline comes back several times, and the more that's added and the more questions, the bigger it is in my mind and the more I have to break it apart, and it becomes very overwhelming to me. I want to start actually doing much smaller outlines, like just the facts, and maybe you guys say, well, this needs to happen to set this up. So it's like very thin, but it gives me room to play with.
That's where I am, Dave. I feel like in the past, Sean might have, and when I say in the past, it's not like these are, like we've gone up and down on this. We've kind of been adjusting as we go and seeing what's best for each of us at a given time. And we learn more each time. We learn more about ourselves and about each other. But there might be something where, I don't know that this is literal, but just for the sake of example, so-and-so comes into the room and so-and-so is upset with them, and this person says this, and they argue back and forth, and there's this thing in the background, blah, blah, blah. Not literally in the background, but like the backstory for it. And really now I want that beat to say, person A enters the room and he and person B have an argument about X. Like, that's what I want. I want like 2 sentences or one.
And see, I know for a fact that will work with Johnny, because really, that's what we did all the way back in Unicorn Western. That's what those beats were like. So I know we can do that. I worry about that kind of outlining with Dave, because he gets lost in the outline and throws things away and starts over, and doesn't necessarily stick with it in that way.
Well, if I see the structure that's there, like if I see the bullet point structure, it's easier to stick to than if I see a whole shitload of words that I can't, like, when it becomes too overwhelming, I have to break it all down individually to find out what matters, what doesn't. If I just see you got to have this, you got to have that, I think it'll be a little easier for my head to wrap around it. Because every time I get another outline, I break out my journal, I start writing shit down, and it's cumbersome and it's time consuming.
Yeah, you know what I think is the way to hack our process, Dave? No, I think what we do is get that real bare bones outline, but then verbalize it. Like, get on a story meeting and talk through the story. So, in the same way I'm telling myself that story, we would just tell each other the story. I think again, there is no template for this. I think it's.
I think that will help. We used to do it a lot more back when we were just fucking flying through shit. So. Well,
yeah. Right, and we can do that, and I think you're protective of my time in the same way that Bonnie is, but you don't need to be. Like, I keep offering.
I know, and it costs more time because you're waiting on me. So.
Yes, yes. I want to be doing those story meetings with you, because I know that if you're engaged in the story and you're excited about the story and you know the story, then it happens. But you like, we have to get you there, and
you gotta fluff me.
Yeah, I do have to fluff you. And what happens is that you're excited enough about the story, but it's like a false confidence. You're like, I'm ready, I got it. But then once you've said that, you never want to take it back. You don't want to be like, you know what, a story meeting would really help. You're like, no, I've got it. The door is closed. I'm
already halfway up the cross. I got to stay on here.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I started to feel that way with this big project because I was relying. I mean, there were meetings.
Johnny froze.
We lost Johnny. Uh-oh, Mayday, Mayday. I think I could tell his story. He was going to say that there were meetings where there wasn't anything I could really do to help with the story. It was mostly that he just needed the like companionship of talking about it and, you know, maybe hearing himself out loud so we could bounce back and forth. But he was so deep in the story that it's not like I could really answer questions. He would almost give me hypotheticals. What if this and what if that? But I wasn't reading right behind him because the whole thing was just too messy. So it's different. You know, there's been a lot of stories where I'm like a day behind Johnny, but you know, that's never happened with me and you. Like, can you imagine if I was editing one day behind you writing? That would make you crazy.
Oh no, I would lose my mind and I'd want to change shit and
right.
Like, nope, too late. And I'm like, fuck. Johnny's computer restarted. He said we should wrap this up because by the time his computer restarts, it'll be a lost cause.
Yep, that sounds about right. So anyway, yeah, I think the takeaway here is that your process is individual, and you're not going to find somebody else's process who, you know, oh, that works really well for them, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna get up at 5:30 in the morning. I'm gonna hit the, you know, words as soon as I wake up and clock out at 12. Like, that's what works for me, but it doesn't have to work for anybody else. But we should be paying more attention to what works. And every single new book is an opportunity to scale our process. And that's my favorite thing about working with Bonnie. It's not just her insight into character and all the stuff that she's so good at, and the fact that story jackets come built into my process. Like, I'm really lucky for all of that. But my very favorite thing about working with Bonnie is that every project we work on, it's like, okay, what are we actually working on? What do we want to get better at? And so that my voice becomes better, our process becomes more fluid with every project. And that's something that you and I, Dave, have talked about for a long time, but we really should start doing it more aggressively. And it's happened with Johnny because he's an optimizer anyway. But this last project really took us off the rails. I mean, a year is absurd.
That's longer than I've taken, although it was like hundreds of thousands of words. So
yeah, no,
I take a year on a 60,000 word book.
Yeah, your record was 9 months on a 30,000 word novella.
All right.
but
okay.
but he's got you beat. He's got you beat for sure. So I think it's a matter of, we learned a lot, and I think that, you know, I'm lucky enough to work with several different people, so I can take that learning, you know, in different contexts. But I think we're ready for a renaissance. I think we're ready for, you know, the next chapter in our collaborative process.
All right. Well, let's turn that page.
All right. Ooh, look at that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week. And we still have Bonnie coming on for part 2 of our character talk, and we'll do that next week. So see you then.
Later.